Do you want to start, Darren, and tell me a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
So I work for LKAB, Swedish state-owned mining company in the north of Sweden, and I look after the minerals part of LKAB, where we operate from the US to Asia Pacific, and it's mainly byproducts that come from our mining operations, but also all sorts of other industrial applications.
And Thomas, do you want to go next?
Happy to. Good morning, London. My name is Thomas Hörnfeldt, and I work for SSAB, which is a Scandinavian and North American steel company, which means that we're one of the hard-to-abate sectors. Nevertheless, we are in the process of abating it as we speak.
And I mean, both steel and rare earth metals is something that is frequently brought up in the transition to net zero society. So given that we have two experts here, it's such, we would love to hear a bit more on the details of this as well. So should we start with the basics? Could you talk a bit more, Darren, about what are the different kinds of metals and what are they used for?
In terms of rare earths?
Yes.
Well, I mean, rare earths are being talked about more increasingly. They're actually not that rare in their occurrence. They're occurring in most rock formations. The difficulty is getting them out efficiently and separating them out. And Europe has high demand for rare earths, but no kind of supply and no base source for that. Why they're important is that they're all around us, and they're especially in all of the new technology, all of the, whether it's from wind farms, the magnets in wind turbines, in motors, but also all of the technology on our phones, everything in hospitals. So we need lots of them. And I think an important message is that although whenever you're taking things out of the ground, it is a finite resource and you can't keep taking it out forever. At some point in the future, we'll need to be recycling and everything needs to be circular. But the demand for rare earths and many other materials, including steel that we'll talk about, continues to increase. And we need to look at how can we do that in the most efficient way until at some point in the future, we've got a fully circular economy. So they're critically important for everything that we're going to talk about in terms of the transformation.
And what kind of scale are we talking about? What have you seen in the past years in terms of the increase in demand for this?
I mean, there are various reports. I saw one yesterday that around a 40-fold increase in between now and 2040 to achieve all of these things. And I think it's interesting. So Alec mentioned the 75% of global CO2 emissions are energy related, and that's of the total about 50 billion CO2. Of that, only around a third of that 75% is electricity generation. 2/3 are things that need to be electrified, or processes like hydrogen, which we'll come on to talk about. So the amount of electricity generation that's going to be required to get to zero or towards zero CO2 is absolutely huge. And that requires materials, and it requires an awareness of where they come from and how we need to use them as a route to go forward to get towards zero.
And another key material as well to get to net zero is, of course, steel. And do you want to talk a bit more, Thomas, about how steel is applied also in the net zero transition?
Happy to. As opposed to Darren's metal, steel is not rare at all. It's one of the most commonly used materials, and it's also the world's most circular material. We recycle more steel every year than aluminum, plastic, glass, wood, paper, and so on combined. And also when we recycle steel, when we put that in an electric arc furnace and melt it down to make new products, we break down the material to atomic level. We really create a virgin material also from recycled content. So there is no aging in steel. Once we have actually made steel, we can recirculate it pretty much forever. The only thing is that the steel consumption in the world is increasing. It has almost tripled since the start of this century. And that has got to do with that we have an increasing population in the world, we have an increased standard of living in the world, we have an increased urbanization, and all this drives steel consumption. And that means that all the recycled steel in the world can't really keep up with demand. We need also to add to the pool of steel in the world from virgin materials, from iron ore, without fossil CO2 emissions. And that is what we are working on at SSAB. The conventional method of turning iron ore into iron is to use carbon and coke, which creates significant CO2 emissions. And what we are doing right now is that we're replacing carbon and coke with hydrogen as a raw material, which means that we create only, instead of CO2, we create H2O, also known as water, as a byproduct in the future. We have a pilot plant up and running for this right now, and we are preparing for full commercialization as we speak. In fact, we will put fossil-free steel on the market as a commercial product in 2026.
Now, remember, I've actually seen a watch as well that was made from one of your colleagues.
That is correct. That is the first consumer product that is commercially available today. It's made by a Swedish watchmaker called Triva from fossil-free steel powder from one of our plants.
And you talk about there in terms of recycling as well. When do you expect in the future that we will be at that point that we can actually be enough that we can just recycle the steel as well? Do you see that in the future?
Yeah, but I don't think I or even you will see that in our lifetime, actually. Right now, the steel consumption in the world is projected to almost double until 2050. And the increase in steel consumption can be compensated by increased availability of recycled steel, but the amount of virgin materials that we need to add every year remains relatively constant. And again, that's not a problem per se. There is a lot of iron ore in the world. We just have to turn that into steel without CO2 emissions. And that's what we have a solution for right now. So I'm relatively optimistic for the future.
We like positive here, outlooks as well. And as we discussed before, it's very important with the collaborations, and you have done a lot of that, of course. Darren, can you speak a bit more about the importance and how you have shared ideas?
Well, I guess collaboration has always been critical to bring any product to market. Even the most simple products are too complex if you look at the two value chain for any one person or teams to know that. So collaboration is important, but that's the need for that is increasing because of the technical complexity. And as we know ourselves, SSAB and Vattenfall have been working closely together on zero fossil fuel, but there's also a huge amount of other partners that we've had to have for the electrolysis to produce the hydrogen. I mean, the investments that we're making at LKAB site in Mount Berriet, which is a big part of the plans for the 2026 zero fossil fuel, that's incredibly complex. And it's next generation developments that are having to be done. For us to be able to go towards 2,000 meters, completely electrify all of the mines, all of the technology requires huge collaboration. So it's always happened, but I think that the need for that and the need for it to be across borders, cooperation across regions is very important.
Yeah. And do you see a lot of differences between regions in terms of how far ahead we are in more sustainable operations?
I think when I say regions, I mean, of course, we've had decades now, globalization, where things moved all around the world. And even the EU's critical raw materials recognizes that we can never be self-sufficient. But I think from the Western, as a region of Europe, we've almost forgotten where things come from and what they're made from. And although no one country has all of the resources it needs, as a region, we could have most of the resources. So that's where I think regions around the world, the most CO2 efficient way is to take responsibility for resources and we take responsibility for value chain. So I think that regional cooperation, and of course for Europe, I think there is now far more talk about taking responsibility within Europe than there has been in the past 20, 30 years.
It's going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just want to pause here as well. Remember that you're more than welcome to ask questions as well. So I'll have some more questions, but please raise your hand and we'll run around with the microphones as well. So you can add that as well. And we have saved some time for that. But before that, and while you're thinking, Thomas, could you speak to a little bit more also, given that we have this solution now to make fossil-free steel, that's amazing innovation, of course. How can we ensure that that becomes the norm? Because to your point, there's so much steel that is being produced. How can that be the norm?
Well, I have one hobby horse here, and that is that I believe in transparency. I think people want to make the right choices, and we have to make that easy. We have to make the advantages tangible. If we could arrive at a stage where we can declare what kind of climate impact various products have, I'm fairly sure that we have a customer demand out there. We can already see today that the companies that we are working with that are closest to a consumer product as opposed to a business-to-business product, they see a very clear demand from consumers wanting to make the right choices. And we can see that that has increased dramatically in Europe in the last 3-4 years. And we can see the same development globally. Basically, we're at different stages and at different paces, but we are moving in the right direction. So I think that what we need to have is a simple and tangible and neutral way to make climate impact of products and materials visible to the end consumer. If we can achieve that, then we are on a very good way to reducing and eliminating climate impact.
Mm. And it's a good point there as well, making it just visible as well, like with the watch, because sometimes it's difficult to understand if it's more B2B, of course. So it's interesting that you have all those different solutions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think maybe is not possible short term, but many people are talking about is some kind of VAT mechanism also for CO2, that you can track this all through the value chain. So once a product ends up in front of a consumer or decision maker, they can actually clearly see what kind of climate impact do I have when I make this choice.
Mm. Is that something you see also on your end in terms of how we can make the sustainable choice the norm?
I think, well, I guess for it to be more the norm, I think it has to be demand driven. And going right back to from a mining point of view, we don't extract things out of the ground just to take them out. Therefore, demands for society and all the things that we have. So I think there's more of a discussion. And again, so I mentioned about the planning and the things that we need to do, and the need to do them faster. There's great, I think, not the total awareness of how we do things and some of the decisions that we have to take. So I think having that discussion as a society, where do things come from, how do we do it, and how do we make some of the difficult decisions is absolutely critical. But I mean, when you look at electric cars being used, whether it's legislation that's changing that or whether it's demands of people wanting to move in that direction, I think there's a lot of demand-led behaviours that have to change. But then there also needs to be lots of government support with major infrastructure decisions on a whole host of things. So I think it's a combination. It's a very complex thing, but it's behaviours, keep making the right messages. And I guess if there is a point, if there's one thing that I have been alarmed at in recent years, is that I think people were starting to follow the science and recognizing that human influence, climate change was absolutely a thing. The science isn't that complex behind that. But now it seems to have been polarized politically all of a sudden. And I think that's an alarming concern, really, in that we need to kind of bring people back to the science.
If I may add something there, I think we can also see that the interest and the demand for low carbon fossil free materials is steadily increasing, and electric cars, for example, is a good example of that. Once we get rid of tailpipe emissions in the automotive sector, the climate impact actually comes from materials. We see the same thing in buildings today. We have zero energy or low energy buildings where the use of the building doesn't really create that much of a carbon footprint, but it's all about the materials that go into the building. So I think we have a good situation insofar that we can see that we get an increasing interest and focus on this. And again, given the fact that we can make this transparent to decision makers, we will see a transition here very, very fast.
So no green hushing here, we'll share.
No, I don't think so. Absolutely not.
Questions from the audience? Oh, good. We're starting here directly with an engaged audience. Love it.
Hi. Thank you very much, both Thomas and Darren. I have a question to you around the kind of like, while admitting that, of course, carbon is one of the biggest issues for kind of like creating a positive impact in both kind of steel industry and minerals industry. There are, of course, other not more prominent, but also important issues affecting both industries, such as biodiversity, social issues in the supply chain, communities affected by operations of these businesses. Are those also kind of integrated into your impact strategies and your business strategies? And if so, how? Thank you.
So to repeat the question for everyone and for you, Thomas, the question was about also beyond carbon. What are you looking and what are your strategies for biodiversity and social aspects, for example? Darren, do you want to start?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question. And I mean, one of the things you can't get away from is that when you are expanding a mine or developing a new mine or building a new steel plant, there is an environmental impact of that. It's clear to see. The challenge is, if society requires those materials, how do you do it in the most sustainable way? And this is where I think we need to stop kind of hiding behind it and think, well, if we're going to do it, let's do it in the most sustainable way. And I'm quite confident that if we expanded an operation in the north of Sweden, the focus on sustainability and the impact on communities would be far greater than in some parts of the world, where if we don't do it there, where do we get that from? I mean, if there was an amazing reserve of cobalt or something on the outskirts of London and we said we were going to build a mine to mine it, there would be outrage and uproar, probably try to block it, but then we kind of bury our heads in the sand and think, well, let's get it from some part of the world where it's extracted in not the same way. So it's a fantastic question, but I think it comes down to some of the difficult decisions we have to take. And if we need it, if we want to build hospitals, if we want to build a wind turbine that's 500 tons of steel, a third of which is scrap and 2/3 has to be virgin, the copper, the rare earths, where does it come from? And so it is a good question, but mining companies, steel companies, industry needs to take responsibility for doing it in the most sustainable way. Mm.
I saw one more question there as well behind. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is in relation to transport. Every business and every organization that makes or produces something emits carbon dioxide, but it's not the greatest emitter. The greatest emitter that any company has is in transporting its product from one place to another. Mm-hmm. So I suppose my question is, what are your plans to reduce the emissions created in your transporting of your product? And how can businesses help themselves without government support?
So the question was around, and I'll let you speak to that, Thomas, around how can we also ensure that transportation is done in a most sustainable way? And I also have to do a mini commercial for, we have a session around climate neutral logistics as well later on. So we will have additional information on that then. But Thomas, do you want to add?
Absolutely, and it's a very good question. It's actually something that we are increasingly also getting from our customers these days. They are saying, as you do, that, okay, great, SSAB, you have a fossil-free product at your factory gate. How do I get it to me in a fossil-free way also? If I can make a small commercial also, one of our fossil-free partners is the Volvo Group, making electric trucks, for example, where they actually already today are using fossil-free steel in parts of their vehicles. And together we can then offer also electric transport solutions, but also we use as much railway as we can, which is electric, and we have a clean electric system. We're also already today using biodiesel powered vessels across the Atlantic for our transports of sponge iron, for example. And also when we're getting rid of carbon and coke in our operations, I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but a lot of that is being shipped from Australia to Scandinavia today. And that is something that is completely eliminated and instead replaced by hydrogen that we produce on site using fossil-free electricity. So the short answer here is that we can offer a number of carbon-free transportation solutions for our customer in terms of railway, shipping, but also electric trucks in the future, and already today.
Yeah. You want that? You can add something.
I was just going to add to that a little bit. I mean, all of the great examples that Thomas gave there in terms of how you reduce the CO2 per ton produced and moved around. But it also comes back to the point on taking regional responsibility. And I give one example of when we talk about British steel a lot in the news, steel made in the UK. Of course, 100% of the iron ore is imported. And if you produce something in any country, the raw materials come from different parts of the world. So it's about how do you reduce the CO2 per ton when you do move something, but also about how do you not move it as far. And not moving it as far means taking responsibility for more local supply chains.
Yeah. We unfortunately need to wrap up there, but I love the engagement and the questions, so keep them coming. But before I let both of you go, I mean, I wouldn't be working at Spotify if I didn't have a music question. So I would love to hear, we all need to feel that energy and so on to take action to combat climate change. So I want to know, which is your go-to song when you need to feel a bit more energized? They have not heard this before, so who wants to go first?
Well, I would go for anything that's played on a steel guitar.
Oh, nice. And Darren?
I think it'd be Killer's Mr. Brightside.
Oh, we'll do a playlist of all of this and share afterwards. Yeah. But give a huge applause to the panelists and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.